This is Larry Hayward, pastor of Westminster Presbyterian Church in Alexandria, Virginia. I know by now that most of you have learned that we will be concluding this year and a half of devotionals on June 30th. In many ways, we will miss them. And I believe some of you all will as well. But we're trying to focus our work and our time back in the church. As we move into the greater use of technology, we may have something along these lines that we are able to develop. But for now, we'll give this form of ministry a rest. Thank you for all the times that you've tuned in. I want to conclude my share of these by finishing up the 5th chapter of Ecclesiastes. Today is on a somewhat sad and lonely note. The next week's will not be. As we've seen in this 5th chapter, the subject of riches comes in. And there's a sad situation described in our passage for today. It starts at verse 13. There is a grievous ill that I have seen under the sun. Riches were kept by their owners to their hurt. And those riches were lost in a bad venture. Though they are the parents of children, they have nothing in their hands. What gain do they have from toiling for the wind? For all their days they eat in darkness, in much vexation and sickness and resentment. I once knew a family who owned an automobile dealership in a small town during the 1980s. In one of the tough recessions, the family had to close their business. They managed to avoid bankruptcy, and the older generation in the family were able to move to a retirement home. But I remember the second generation, a man older than me at the time, saying that they had sold everything off at auction: screws, nuts, bolts, tools, and of course the remaining used cars they had. He said his father kept one used car for him and his mother, turned off the lights, and drove away from a lifetime of work. In some ways, at first glance, it sounds in this passage that the people who have lost their riches have been somewhat greedy. They have, quote, kept their riches to their hurt and lost them in a bad venture. Perhaps a business deal that just didn't pan out, perhaps gambling, perhaps an embezzlement scheme. Our compassion for such folks is mixed at best. But as far as I know, the couple I knew were simply in a tough business, the auto industry, at a very challenging time. As many of you will recall, people simply were not buying large American cars, what we called gas guzzlers, in the 70s and 80s when the auto dealerships were full of them. In either case, whether we are victims of a bad economy, an investment that in hindsight we should not have made, or some other event, it is hard to suffer a financial setback, especially in the latter years of life. But as the next verse in Ecclesiastes says, it is fitting to find enjoyment in all the toil with which one toils under the sun, the few days God gives us. I think, and I trust, and I hope that the family who owned the dealership for many years eventually found joy in the memories of their toil, as they had found joy in the toil itself. Some of you who hear this are doubtless retired. Some are well set. Some have suffered losses, no doubt. I hope looking back, you can be proud of what you have done, of what you have accomplished, of what you have contributed to the world with the work of your hands, with what you have given with your heart and your life and your talent. Reversals are never the final word. Amen.